Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me on the very first episode of Rune Radio podcast. The person I have here with me now, we've been wanting to do this for such a long time. Ian, my guest here, is the person who first pitched the idea to me, and I immediately fell in love with it. So, of course, he had to be the first person I have on as a guest. There I do have to preface this a little bit. I am not home alone. My toddler is right there in the background, and I understand it may seem a bit unprofessional, but it was unfortunately the only option. And I couldn't bring myself to reschedule again if we could avoid it, because we had already had to reschedule it at least once, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, it's a learning experience for me too. Please leave your feedback, both positive and negative, in the comments. I will learn from it and only try to improve from here on. Now, onto the meat of the thing. Ian, you well, we've known each other for quite a while on the interwebs, and I know a little bit about you, about the things that you told me about the place you lived. So I would like to ask, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about, well, yourself, your experiences?
Okay, so I'm an expat, so I live in a different country from where I was raised. And my interest in the occult, I would say that it started from childhood, growing up in rural England with a very, very strict sort of Christian Protestant Huguenot upbringing, which I kind of started to reject at the sort of my early teens. But the wonderful thing about where I grew up was that it's some of the oldest churches in England. It's basically South Lincolnshire, so it's directly where the Normans and the Vikings came in, and they're the sort of flat top churches. And something about, for example, going to Harvest Festival in September in that church made such a deep esoteric impression on my young mind. My father was also a farmer, so there was this connection to the land. And I don't know why it is when I sit down finally to do a podcast with Tina that my notifications are going berserk, and the cat for once is sat right next to me. It's you, I reckon. Anyway, um, I'll try not to get distracted. So there was something that planted a seed, pardon the pun, in my mind that there was something else going on, you know. And I think, you know, growing up in the late 70s and the 80s, the music scene. My favorite band of all time is a band called Fields of the Nephilim, and they had occult lyrics, and I think I was just the combination of like things I was experiencing in my musical upbringing kind of plunged me into that world, and I didn't really explore it fully until sort of I guess about 20 years ago, when I really started to look back and start to take it a bit more seriously. And it's sort of been, well, as you know, once you put your toe in the water, you kind of get engulfed by an ocean of meld, that's it, you can't stop. So I'm basically someone who I do practice. I don't like saying this. I do practice magic occasionally. I'm not a hardcore practitioner, but we can talk about that later actually. But I am someone that has both an intellectual and experiential in in what we badly term the occult. So that's me in a nutshell. Why I'm here talking to you,
All
my
right, good
favorite
to hear.
YouTuber.
Oh, thank you, Ian. I appreciate it. Well, I do think I know what you mean with the what's badly phrased with occultism, because it's not really occult anymore, is it? A lot of things have become quite mainstream, I would say. It's not so secret anymore. There are people now that even post their entire rituals and altars on social media. which
God,
kind of
we
defeats
need
the
3 hours
point of
just
it.
on that alone.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like the opposite of punk. You know, like wow, what the fuck? Yeah. Can I swear and drink and smoke on the channel?
I'll join you. No, I don't care about smoking at all, or drinking for that matter. Just
Not smoking actually, but
the authentic
oh,
experience.
we do the swearing together. All right. Sorry, I
Well,
interrupted you.
no, it's okay. I mean, I wanted to ask you, would you call yourself a pagan or more like a general practitioner?
I would, if I had to classify myself, I'm an animist.
Mm.
100%. I believe in spirits of place, you know, in supposedly inanimate objects. Um, I'm, yeah, I think that's the only term. If I was going to use a term, I could use that. I have any sort of because, and you could probably argue that I'm talking rubbish, but I feel that it doesn't come with so many terms and conditions. You know, like I've always I don't find the grimoires absolutely fantastically fascinating, but the whole Christian context that they're in just completely it's like an instant block. You know, it's like kissing a girl who's chewing gum, which actually might be okay for some people, you know, but not, it's not what I like. So it's just an instant blockage. So I've kind of had to really and I know that there's a lot of levels of esotericism behind the Christian archetypes, etc., etc. But I can't go there because I was raised really strict Christian, and I've got so many fundamental problems there. So, but then I'm not against the use of the term pagan, but I don't really like it either because it feels like an us and them thing, which again for my pea-sized brain, it's another barrier. And I think the whole thing about magic for me is to try and get rid of barriers and just trying to open up to source, whatever that source is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when people hear the word pagan, and I hear this personally a lot, so
Shit.
because I think when people hear the word pagan, and I do also call myself a pagan, it's a reaction I get a lot also. So like, oh, so you're one of those people who like to dress up in robes as druids and wizards and go bang a drum at Stonehenge. But it's not what we are at all. I mean, what I am at all. So I completely understand there is a mental image that people have, which is solely to blame to the witch aesthetics that you see on Instagram a lot. And I resent it personally as well. And I understand why you would avoid calling yourself a pagan. There, I could call myself different things as well, but that comes with kind of the same problem in a different costume, let's call it. If I call myself an asatruar, that also immediately conjures up the image of like, ah, you like to LARP as a Viking. Like, no, I don't. But about animism, though, the, I know what it is to believe that everything has a spirit and that spirits are constantly around us anywhere. Do you have any direct experiences with that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, so it started at an early age with I had some supernatural experiences as a sort of teen, but more in my late teens. But I always felt growing up that I had an acute sensibility to certain places or environments. I found out 50 years plus into my life. I'm not going to say my age, but I found out that I was autistic, which kind of put a new thing, a new spin on things. So you know, when you get a sort of late diagnosis like I've had, not that I needed, well, I did need a diagnosis because I'm very cause and effect based, but I kind of figured it out before the diagnosis, which led me to getting a diagnosis. But I sort of thought, oh, looking back, maybe it's just that I've got like hypersensitivity to certain things. So I kind of can't separate the two because it's me, you know. But in a way, it doesn't matter. The fact that I've always experienced stuff sensory first. Like if I walk into the room, my senses are going off like crazy, whether or not it's haunted or someone's died there or just someone had a shit in the corner. I'm gonna pick up on stuff, right? And I think that it wasn't until I started to look at that through lens that I started to understand, oh, maybe there's something actually in this, rather than it's just me being me, if you know what I mean. So I'd say that that was really key, and I think that that sort of stuck with me my whole life. But it's not really been until I actually moved to another country that I really started to experience some quite mad stuff. So yeah, it's been in the last. I've moved. I've been an expat for 10 years now, and it's been yeah, it's been in those 10 years that stuff's really started to surface. But it's also, I think, like I've done a lot of shadow work, and I've done a lot of trauma healing, and I've done a lot of really deep self work this last 10 years since moving. And I'm massively into metaphysics. So the idea that through certain self procedures that will actually manifest stuff in the physical plane. So, for example, my personal interests are in African traditions. I don't know my DNA. I never did a DNA test, and I'm also an orphan. I was adopted at 6 weeks. I was born into a children's hospital, so I don't know anything about my heritage, and so I probably don't have an African bone in my body. Apart from I've got a very flat head on top, but you know what? So what? So what? The point is about African traditions is that they're in and you just have to look at the work of Michel Bertot. It's really about metaphysics, you know. That's where I'm going with that. So,
Well,
are
African
you with me?
traditions are
Yeah,
extremely animist,
yeah.
very
As
much
well
so. So I do see the appeal.
as
Um, could you give us an example, like when you walk into a room and say you have this sensory overload, or an over lots of sensory uh, stimulation coming at you?
yeah.
How would you pick it up? Is it visual? Is it auditory, or just a general feeling? Or some
Okay,
people
so
smell?
it's it's so it's like the atmosphere will transmit itself to me through my senses, sometimes more than one. But like when I, you know, the kinesthetic type of vibe, you know, it's like sometimes I'll get visuals, sometimes I'll get a really intense sense of smell. Sometimes it's just a horrible feeling that engulfs my whole body, like a panic reaction. Or I think, yeah, I think the fight or flight, that part, the ancient, you know, the amygdala and the reptilian side, it's automated literally like that with me sometimes.
And is
So
that
yeah,
solely to do?
I mean, I can. Sorry, so go on.
No, no. I just want to ask: is that solely to do with the spirits that inhabit a particular locale, or does it also pertain to spirits attached to people?
So with in terms of spirits attached to people, I definitely see auras. I have done my whole life. I just didn't know what they were until I guess I read a book on auras, and then I was like, oh yeah, I got that. You know, that one's banana. You know, like um, but then well, I sort of think you gaslight yourself over time, and then you see, I stopped seeing them so vividly, and because I kept telling myself it wasn't real, and I realized it was real. Point. It was like I started sort of seeing them more in terms of like sort of coming at me with different levels of information. So, but hang on, before I get distracted, it's less about spirits attached to people. I'm not really good at attachments. It's about the vibe of the place. It's very much about the spiritus loci, you know, the energy of the place, you know. It's really strong in me, and it's been a real struggle my whole life, and particularly since I moved, as I said. And I think what happened with moving is that I was displaced from my ordinary, and I became it just sort of, it was like, okay, you know, if you imagine life as a graphic equalizer, you know, you can turn the bass up and the treble down, or depending on what music you want to listen to or how the party's going, you know, it was like suddenly my graphic equalizer got completely fucked up, and I had to start learning to remix everything. And it was then when I was stuff over here that's really going on, you know. And like I've spent most of my adult life in London, in East London, and that's got a hell of a lot of heritage and local spirits, you know. And moving to a European rural area, it was like I was kind of I don't know what I was expecting, but I don't think I expected to come up with so many spirits as I have done, you know.
I
Because like you just
yeah.
think about a market street in Whitechapel, like how many thousands upon thousands upon thousands of little and big feet have gone up and down those cobbles, you know. But then here it's just, it's the same. It's just the energy's more dissipate. I don't know. It's crazy, right?
Well, as somebody who has moved countries myself, I do relate because I have never had as much spirit activity happen around me as when I moved
Right.
here. And the absolute middle of nowhere where I first lived, I didn't expect that at all. And it was Thomas Sheridan that explained this to me, or at least said that this was also common with English women who moved to Ireland. All of a sudden, they would get barraged
Wow.
almost by fairy activity, which is quite demonic in
Okay.
Ireland. It's very bad.
Yeah, yeah.
And apparently, it has to do with the fact that we are strange to these local spirits, and that catches
Yes,
their
yes, yes,
interest.
yes. 100%. Because now I can stop gaslighting myself, you know, because I just think it's me, you know. But that's so interesting because like, so do you remember how Thomas explained it? Or because what is it about the fact that the Irish and the British were not very good friends for a long time? Or
Uh,
like I get in my country, you know, we have a long history between the Brits and where I am, you know. Is it that? Um,
I think it's just a general thing, to be honest, because I think that the curiosity comes mostly for the fact that when we as humans, when we see something new, a novelty, something that we're not used to seeing, like a whole different note in an otherwise familiar song, it catches our interest immediately, and we tend to hone in on that. And I think it's the same in the spirit world. They just see something that they're not used to seeing, a certain
yeah,
frequency that they're
it's a
not used to
disruption, isn't it?
experiencing. Yes.
Yeah, it's the glitch in the matrix. It's the disruptor. It's yeah, yeah. I think you're right. Yeah, I like that.
And would you say that it has been a negative experience or more neutral? Because you can have increased activity that's also neutral. Or do you have the impression that it kind of not so friendly?
Great. That's a great question. It's been very, very hostile at times.
Oh,
So hostile that I've literally felt that it's interesting because I want to relate this back to the kind of animist quantum voodoo thing, because I think whatever's happening here is also happening outside and vice versa. I specifically, with how I am built neurologically and physically, I have a big problem with liminality. So my brain doesn't really understand where my body stops and the world begins, if that makes sense. I also have problems when I'm outside of a very confined space, like my house is full of junk and very dark. I struggle to feel okay. So I've tried to explain that from a neurological point of view. I've tried to explain it from a medical, physical point of view, and I've also tried to explain it from a mystical point of view, and it's all three. So when I just know that when I'm in a space where I physically don't feel okay, I always have to double check to see if there's something else going on, and vice versa. Right? Does that make sense?
It does make sense, yes.
Okay.
Definitely, because we
So I'm
are.
not completely insane.
No, because I mean
Um,
we underestimate it, but the brain is a receiver above all things. So yes, when we have these intrusive thoughts that keep us up at night, that may not even be us thinking it. It is some outside influence uh, nagging
yeah.
at us.
So I'm at we talked about this actually. I think you posted something on Substack a couple of months ago, and you were talking about intrusive thoughts, and I just done a whole sort of therapy course in intrusive thoughts. Um, the problem is for me, my intrusive thoughts only come when I'm in certain places. That's where the intersection for me is so fucking interesting, because is it yeah, I'm not going to say demonic attack, you know, but is it,
But it
is
is
it,
kind of a demonic.
yeah, is it, I don't know. I think for me personally, I really think where I think it's, look, I struggle to relate to time and space. So my kind of heaven on earth is feeling my boots on the ground. I don't want to go into the fucking seventh dimension. I'm happy on Earth, right? I'm a Saturnal kind of being. My astrology is Cancer, but I'm quite happy. And I'm not, you know, we can go into that as well, maybe another time. But I'm just getting my head around the carbon and the mud and the mushrooms and the, you know, because that's actually already too intense for me. The minute you add some little spirit dust into that, it's like, whoa, what the fuck's going on? I'm just trying to go for a walk in the woods, and you're throwing that at me. Like, is that my is that like, come on, you know? Do you know what I'm saying? So
I do.
yeah, I get that. I get that a lot. I'm probably not being very clear, but I'm
No,
sort of,
I understand. When I lived in our other place in Italy, we had a beautiful valley right next to the village. And at
yeah,
first,
I
I
saw
loved to
pictures
go
of
there.
that.
But after
Yeah.
a while, I stopped going because weird things just kept happening every time. One time, I heard a woman singing, and there was nobody there. There
Wow. Wow.
absolutely nobody there. If they would have been ahead of me, I would have seen them. If they would be behind me, I would have seen them too because they would have walked past me because I stopped in the track in the trail and there was no other trail. They couldn't have gone through the underbrush. Could have definitely heard them go through it because it makes a lot of noise.
Mm,
And I heard this
mm.
humming, this very clear humming. It wasn't. Is that scary? Yeah, in a way, it is scary because what is it? I don't know if you're hostile or not.
Yeah.
I'm going to assume you
I,
are.
I've re I've been talking. I've got to know Abby de Vere, who's the daughter of Nicholas de Vere, who wrote in a really important book called The Dragon Legacy. I don't know if you know that book, but
I might have heard of
we've
it.
become friends recently. Okay, it's a must read. And she has introduced me to a woman called Amanda Mariana Radcliffe, who is the priestess of the Gnostic Church in France,
I do know
and
who
we've
that is.
just
I do.
recently become friends.
Yeah.
Okay, and she is a very close friend and an ex-partner of a filmmaker called Richard Stanley. Now, there's a crazy connection in my life to all of those three, and it's too new for me to talk about. My point being that both Richard and Amanda have experienced La Dame Blanche, the White Lady
Oh,
apparition, at various
okay.
points in their life.
Yeah.
And you see where I'm going with this. What the hell is it?
Yeah.
when you have someone, you're on your own in the woods singing a song in your ear, you know, like what is that energy, you know?
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I know that you talk a lot about you have fairy experiences. My experiences when I'm outside tend to interface with animals most of the time. And these animals will just appear at times when I absolutely need a kind of, it's like a type of divination for me. It's like a yes, no.
Mm.
I'm out, I'm on my bike or I'm walking, I'm intensely focusing on a life question, you know, and that, you know, my animal tarot crew just rock up just at the moment where I need an answer, right? Every fucking time. Um, and that's how it tends to work with me. In terms of spirits of people, they tend to be very much to buildings in my experience. So I've got two sides of the thing going on. I don't experience spirits of people when I'm out and about. It's more energies, and it tends to be animals just appearing. And you could say, well, you live in nature, it's normal, but they only specific animals only ever specifically turn up at specific moments, right? So yeah.
And would you say that you have ever encountered something that you would think is the what is the spirit of a deceased person, or you really are very adamant, like, no, this is a land spirit, or this is some sort of fairy, it was never belonging to a human as such?
So I've only experienced spirits of deceased people in buildings,
Mm,
and outside of that, I have a general theory that because where I live in a kind of valley, and then above the valley, there's lots of big flat plains, which feel extremely hostile. I once spoke to a neighbor friend of mine who, like me, is really interested in history, and he said to me, because I had this theory that maybe there's lots of from like the First or Second World War,
mm,
and because it's wide and open, they're trying to congregate where there's light and food and cigarettes and alcohol and, you know, barbecue and all the and animals, you know, all the good stuff. Maybe they're converging in this valley, and that's what makes this place where I live so intense. He said, yeah, you're absolutely onto something there, but look before the war. And so I did some digging, and there was some pretty huge skirmishes around here, but before World War I, going back way before. And the thing with me is that I always sort of think that maybe you know, as we the further away we get from source in human evolution, whether or not it's the the Kabbalistic concept of the Big Bang, or the modern scientific version of concept of the Big Bang, but the further we get away from source, certain parts of our energies dissipate. We can't connect to them so much. I think maybe it's the same with spirits, that they become, you know, imagine a zombie after not 5 years or 1 year after the societal collapse, but like 1,000 years later, it's going to look pretty rotten, right? Not
mm.
going to be much left. I sort of feel it's like that. Maybe the trace energy gets less powerful, but because there's so many of them, I don't know. It, am I
Well,
making
I
any sense?
I personally believe in the fractal human soul. So when we
Okay.
encounter a ghost, what we think belonged to a person, it might be a couple of things. In my opinion, it might be an actual spirit that was never a human to begin with, but assumes the likeness of one, because for whatever reason, when that
Mm.
person died or passed over, or even before they passed over, they left an enormous energetic imprint because of high emotionality or big
Yeah, yeah,
tragedy.
yeah.
Or it could be a part of our soul that indeed fractures off. So it's not an actual human, but more like the echo of one, like an imprint on the energetic field of Earth. But in most
And if you
cases, I would think it's actually a spirit that assumes the likeliness of a person. That's what I assume in most cases.
A spirit that assumes the likeness. Yeah, that makes sense because I mean, I've spent a lot of my life in Whitechapel, and I've spent a lot of my life in Limehouse. This is the old East End of London. You've got the Ripper murders. You've got, the Chinese opium trade, the docks. Very, I guess, what people would call very low vibrational energy. But I'm someone that is really attracted to that
Mm.
because I feel at home in that kind of energy.
Well,
Yeah,
speaking of which, this is a bit of an odd question,
which
maybe.
is going against everything that everyone is saying on YouTube, by the way.
Yeah, about the Ripper murders. Is there truth to the theory you think that it was a ritual?
It's difficult. They reckon they've solved it. There is a fantastic human being called Bruce Robinson who wrote and directed the best comedy film in the world called Withnail and I in the 80s. Um, Anyone that doesn't know that film needs putting in prison with a TV showing that on repeat for a year.
Okay, I will watch it.
Um, he wrote a book called They All Love Jack, and in that book he claims to solve the Ripper murder. Okay. We've all seen the Johnny Depp version based on the Alan Moore comic. If it's ritualistic, I, I'd say yes, but not in the way that we traditionally think of. So I would say that if you're looking at what's the modern day equivalent, let's say in America in the 90s, some kids shooting a classroom up, drawing pentagrams on the wall beforehand. Is that ritualistic? Well, yeah, it is, I guess. It's not particularly good ritual, but in their minds, maybe it was. I think with the Ripper murders, you're looking at someone who has absolutely an understanding of ritual, but is concocting something maybe above and beyond the current technology or connaissance of what that ritual was. Does
Mm.
that make sense? That's
It,
how I see it.
it makes sense. Yes. It would be pretty hard for anybody to hazard a guess as to what the purpose of that ritual was, if it was
I
one.
think they I think they were a massive innovator. I
Mm.
think they were completely innovative. I think they were probably a tortured genius. The fact that you've got the Hawksmoor Church next door as well, huge. Um, Something about it never adds up, whichever way you look at it. But I think that's the point of a genius or an innovator is that you can't compare originality to non-originality because originality is original. No one's done it before, so there's nothing to compare it to. So all the theories about X, Y, and Z don't add up because this person was clearly a trailblazer, but albeit in a very horrific way. Does that make sense? Yeah.
It does make sense in
But
a horrific way, but I know what you're getting at, and yes, I do agree with you on that. There was a question I wanted to ask about because you said it in the first part about Marianne Radcliffe and another man who had the experience with the White Lady.
Richard
Yes.
Richard Stanley, yeah.
There is another man who says he had an experience with the White Lady at the exact same place or near the same location, which is called Bledsoe. I think, is it Chris or William Bledsoe? I only remember his last name. But his experience with the White Lady, in my opinion, wasn't all that positive. Was there because he said, or at least his experience was that she started to talk to him and humanity has to change and they have to be more what we would call tending towards communism, if we have to put it in a political term. And I was just curious, was their experience similar or how did they experience the White Lady?
Well, I can only speak from what I know from what they have said, so I don't ever want to talk for other people. But the way I understand it is that this, the history of the La Dent Blanche in that vein is based around the Cathars, who were the kind of Gnostic sect that got wiped out by the, well, you know, the Inquisition, etc., etc., etc. But it seems to me that, okay, so Amanda's experience is going on a pilgrimage in Verne, finding a church where she was praying for 200 people, and realizing that the Black Madonna was actually a white Madonna, etc., etc. So we're already looking at spiritual syncretism, if you know what I mean by that. It's why we have, I think every tradition is syncretic. Okay, so that's why we have Palomonte in Cuba, which is the worship of the old gods of the Africans behind the images of the Catholic saints, right? So I think there's a lot in that. When you asked me the question, was it a good or bad experience? So I think that personally, I understand that they had good experiences, but I'm not necessarily sure that if you suddenly wake up in the middle of the night and you've got this 7-foot floating white lady above your bed with a glowing heart is necessarily a good experience. I would shit my fucking pants, for example. You know, so I think that there are, and you know, again, go back to our original conversation, Tina, a lot of these things are location based.
Right.
So I know for a fact that, you know, what Richard's talked about in his interviews in Montségur, which is the last Cathar castle, this white lady, the Dent Blanche, it's Esmond de Foix, as she's known locally, is specific to that tower in that castle, and there's the whole crazy history around that. So are we looking at a concentration of enlightened people congregating against all odds in a place which is given that much energy to a locus, a place, and that energy's got trapped there? Or is that energy already there and it's so powerful that it's bringing those things in? And this is where we go back to the whole voodoo gnostic thing, Michel Berthaud, the quantum physics aspect that I talked about earlier. I don't know, but there is something reflexive going on in our experiences with apparitions or energies or manifestations, whatever you want to call them, and certain places and certain people. I think it's all interconnected, and we sure as fuck don't know what that's about or what interconnects it, but it is a phenomenon.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Look,
I don't have any answers to that, but sure as hell it's a thing, right?
well, in your opinion, to throw in occult or even a Gnostic term at it, would you think of it as an egregore, a god form?
Yeah.
Where do
I
you
think
think?
I'm really glad you used the word egregore, because that's something I'm really interested in. Yeah, I've been interested in that a long time. For me, it's like I was really shit at maths at school. I just remember certain equations had like these kind of horizontal V's. One is greater than and one is lesser than, right? Now, if you apply those V's as an entry and exit point, and you put them together, you've got like a kind of X on its side. If you're with me, I literally think it's that. I think there is some weird mathematical equation going on that probably, I don't know, if you got like some hardcore Lower East Side New York Kabbalists next to, I don't know, like Michel Berthaud, and then next to, I don't know, King Arthur, all round the table, and you got them really high on ayahuasca or really bad QB box wine that you get in France, €2 in the supermarket, you might have the answer, right?
It does. I mean, the shape that you were describing, the two X's. Well, it's a bit difficult, but yeah, the two
Please,
X's.
please tell me that's a Rune. Please tell me
Yes,
that's a Rune thing.
it is actually. It
Ah, yes.
immediately reminded me of the Dagas rune, and it is indeed the
Okay,
liminal,
tell
the
me.
in between, that
Ah,
cannot
you
really
see,
be known. It's a very difficult rune to explain. It's the
that's crazy.
Luciferian moment, the moment of, I see it. And how do you explain that to somebody? What is the truth? You, you can't really explain it. Yeah, it has to be experienced.
You know, there's a diagram that Jordan Maxwell had on the internet very long time ago, but the Lucifer sigil is explained in how light actually goes into the eyes.
Yeah,
Have you seen that?
I do. Yeah.
Right. So, but the fact that you even mentioned Lucifer, which is a personal passion of mine, I'm not a Luciferian, but he or she, depending on which aspect we're talking about, Venus or whatever, it's just been around my whole life. Even the fact that you mentioned that, and the fact that I mention it without even thinking about those lines, and then you say it's a root, that's pure proof that there is an energy, a consciousness, a thread of something which is permeating this conversation, and we just hit that nexus point right then. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. It is.
And I can't explain anything other than that, but we
No.
got there.
That
So
I
I'm
think
gonna go to sleep tonight baffled and depressed, and it's gonna haunt me for the next 10 years, you know.
it is what we call synchronicity, after all. And in my experience, they tend to be positive on the whole. If a synchronicity is negative, it is overtly negative. And if it fills you with this sense of, oh my goodness, what just happened here? It's kind of encouraging in a weird way, because it always makes you want to go just that little bit deeper, just that little bit further, peel back another layer. And there's always another layer to peel back when
Okay,
we're
so
talking about these things.
I'm gonna push back on that just because of me being autistic, and I don't want to go on about that because it's, you know, it's kind of difficult to talk about because there's a lot of people out there that still don't understand the different levels of autism, you know. Like, I appear to most people a normal, if not a bit weird person, but you know, I'm just what they used to call Asperger's. We don't use that term anymore because certain people decided not to because he was a Nazi. Well, whatever. um the point being that when I get a synchronicity like that, I am absolutely, I would say, almost psychopathically driven to want to find the cause and effect of it. And the fact that I cannot, because I think no one can, you know, otherwise we'd all be worshipping at their feet, you know. Um, the ultimate mystic, you know, who cracked the codes to life and the universe and everything. It's a paradox again for me because, you know, I'm compelled by cause and effect, even though I was shit at maths. I was always really good with music, you know. Um, so I need to, oh, why is that happening? What's doing that, etc., etc. But when I can't, and I know I already can't get to the basis of it, it drives me crazy, you know. So I have to limit my amount of time that I spend on this stuff. Otherwise, I will go completely crackers if I'm not already.
I do understand your point of view, but it has an opposite effect on me. I am pretty okay just being in the wonder without really
I'm
needing.
so jealous.
Mm. I used to be like you. Well, no, not like you, but more so towards where you're coming from right now. But I just let go of that, to be honest, because I
Yeah.
think
See,
there is a
I
limited
just cannot.
understanding. It can't be known.
Mm. It's so my point being, I have to limit the channels of information or the channels of specific information that I overload myself with, because it then turns into sensory input, which is exhausting. Then I get burnout, you know. But every day I will do that. You know, my happy place is sat by my fire right here, rocking in my chair, absorbing information, and then I get to a point where it's too much and then I have to go to bed. You know, and so it's but I feel like every day I ask more questions than I answer.
Right.
So then I have to sort of say, and I'm not in your position, Tina, at all. You know, I don't have kids, and that's a mixed blessing. For me, it's probably a good thing, because I think I'd probably be sort of overwhelmed by it, but it's also quite sad as well, especially with my background being adopted and stuff. But my point being is that I kind of I have infinite time in my day. The time in my day to absorb information is just ruled by how much my sensory overload goes up or down, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I really don't think a lot about the practical implications of that, and that's followed my whole life. You know, I'd spend hours and hours and hours working through the night, and then I'd suddenly get to 4 a.m. and suddenly be like, oh shit, I've got to get up in 2 hours to go to work. You know? But with all of that said, it's like a stone in the shoe that you can't quite find where the stone is, you know?
That's a good analogy.
I don't know. It's a
Well,
real one.
to shift gears a little bit.
Yeah, go on, please do.
In the previous segment, you said that you experienced quite a bit of hostility from the spirit world when you moved.
Yeah.
Could you give an example of that?
Literally going into I didn't deal with it very well. I think if you ask my partner, she'd say I was a nut job. But I'd literally have physical like you know, panic attacks and stuff. But they weren't panic attacks from like instant fight or flight, but like 0 to 10 in seconds, and just this, you know. And I've looked into this, and you know, how much of it is my neurological system doing what it does, my nervous system, sorry. But no, there is a level beyond that, and it's hypersensitivity to energy, and sometimes it's so overwhelming. It's literally like, you can imagine a massive Leviathan sized I'm just trying to get my hand in the camera, invisible hand, but it's grey and cold, and it's literally physically pushing you away, you know, like almost like do you ever watch the Ray Harryhausen films like Clash of the Titans and the Seven Voyages of Sinbad? Those anime films from, right, so you've got like the stop motion animation of the giant creatures, and it's literally feeling like that, but it's invisible. So you're going into a place, and suddenly you're overwhelmed by a sense of dread and a sense of hostility, and it's so intense that, and you're experiencing it on your own around other people, and you're trying to make sense of that feeling, but you're also trying to sort of make sense of the fact that no one else is experiencing it around you. And it always happens to me in cars.
In cars?
Yeah.
Is it because maybe a car is a bit of a liminal, you're not here nor there?
It's exactly that, Tina. It's always about liminality for me, and I've literally been spending weeks, if not months, thinking about the fact that I need to start writing about liminality, because I think it's key to this whole thing about how we interface with the spirit world as well as our own realities. I think it's huge, and I don't know what anyone or you think personally about David Icke. I think he gets a lot of stuff right. I think he gets a lot of stuff wrong. but he's certainly someone who I have a lot of respect for. But he was the first person to ever talk about the Saturn moon matrix. Now, my astrology, I'm Cancer ascendant. That's pretty hardcore, okay? That's about as hypersensitive as you can get. So if you look at the relationship between the moon and Saturn, for example, and I talked about this earlier, about being Saturnian, how I'm quite actually very comfortable with my feet in the mud. Yeah. This is so important when you're looking at the things you're talking about, because you need to define your space before you can move beyond that space or decide to stay within it. If you're struggling to even define your space, right? Now, is that an opportunity to get attachment issues with demons? Or maybe. Personally, I tend to think of my personal space as my own private, mobile, 24/7 magic circle. So I don't, as we talked about earlier, I don't really do grimoire magic because I've got a massive blockage with the Christian elements, but I tend to see my kitchen as my magic circle, or my my woods, I'm intelligent and creative enough to be, and energetic enough to be able to take artistic license on those concepts. But when I'm out of those environments, it's a massive problem for me. Sorry, am I diverging too much?
No, no, not at all. I mean, no, we go where
I'm
you
just trying to introduce.
because I do understand the concept of the magic circle not having to be a literal circle that you draw on the floor with symbols and names of gods and everything. It doesn't have to be that. That's just, at the end of the day, just an extension of yourself anyway. So if you manage to make your magic circle your kitchen or your workshop, yeah, well, if you, that is the place where you get into that zone where you can make the connection not only to your deeper self, but also, you know, the magical space really where the creation happens. That is just as valid, in my opinion, because it's a very
Yeah.
distinct
What?
boundary.
Yeah. Where energy flows, it
Yeah,
should be where energy flows.
yeah.
Yeah, completely. And I'm talking chef to chef now as well.
Oh, true. Yeah. For sure. You're the master of the kitchen and nobody else. And yeah, it is something that you can extrapolate to a magical working as well, very easily, even.
100%. And let's talk about that. Unless you had a specific thing that you wanted to cram in our time, but you know,
Oh, no, go, feel free. Yeah.
farming was always local. Cuisine was always local. How do you say récolte? Foraging was always local. Sorcery was always local. It's only in these fucked up times where we've got fucking Klaus Schwab and God knows who else, Bill Gates, administering anti STD drugs to his wife. Like, come on, like, and and people still believe in this stuff. Like, we're living in these global times, and it's not a surprise that everything's fucked up, because we are meant to live locally. It's that simple. It's literally that simple. Okay, yeah, we all need to. I had to do a sound system, and I was missing a jack plug for my amplifier going into my mixer. The only solution where I live is to get Amazon. Okay, I know, but you know what? It's only because, yeah, anyway, bad analogy. Sometimes we have to use the things that we have in our times, but things were always meant to be local. And I'm not talking about tribalism. It's just that we had an inherent connection to the land and what it had to offer us, and the community is based on that. And we are so far away from that today. Um, that's the ultimate problem to me. And however, within that, as a caveat, when people like you and I, we try very hard to get back to that. Not only is it really difficult, personally, I found it really hard. I don't know about you. I'm more of a house husband than I am a provider. But at the same time, we meet with some resistance from the spiritist loci because we're outsiders. They don't recognize us. They're like, well, what are you doing? Coming here on my patch.
Hi. Unfortunately, I will have to end it here because that was the first half of the full podcast that I had with Ian. The full podcast, so the full episode, will be available on Substack for my paying subscribers. I did it this way, not because, well, actually, because people do pay for my Substack. I set my Substack a little bit higher than most do, and I do want to give these people real work for their money. So yes, the full version will be available on Substack for those interested, but I think we ended it on a nice note. This is my very first time, was my very first time doing this, meaning that I am the sole interviewer in a podcast. I know I've been co-hosting podcasts, but this really is a different experience. So if you have any feedback, positive or negative, please let it be known in the comments, because I do want to improve. I want to get better at it, and I appreciate the input, whether it is good or bad. And I will definitely take it in consideration for next episodes, because I do plan to do this more often. I quite enjoy doing them, and I think you would enjoy it too. How often am I going to be able to do this? I don't know. It can be a bit of a tricky thing to plan, but I'm going to try to put out 2 of these a month on top of what I already do on Substack. So I hope you enjoy this. I hope it didn't end too abruptly. That's one of the things I will take in consideration next time. That once we're filming a second, because we took some breaks in between, to announce that it's going to be the end. And yes, that is something that I neglected to do in this very first episode. So please cut me a bit of slack, because it was my first time, and I hope it wasn't too bad. Or at least I hope it was enjoyable enough for you to watch the next ones that I have in store. Thank you so much for watching.